This day, I decided to go into the library and see if I could learn something about the United Nations and confirm my conviction that it was wonderful. So I don't want to drag this on, but it's kind of what led me to where I am today. You might find that a little interesting. So I went up to the International Affairs Department, and I asked somebody, where are the books on the UN? And they said, down there. Well, there weren't too many, but maybe 12 or 13. The first thing I noticed, they were all written by people who worked for the UN or who were academics who were part of the UN, association and things like that. And I was looking for something from someone who was a critic of the UN to see if I could confirm or at least find the source of some of the things I'd heard about it. And I couldn't find any. So I checked out a couple of the books and I read through them and I said, this is bunk. I don't know where that wisdom came from, but it was bunk. You could tell it was propaganda. It was all slanted. So that started me down the path, and it wasn't long after that I wandered down to Larchmont Street in Los Angeles, and there was a communist bookstore down there. It was called the People's Bookshop. So I went in. I thought, well, I want to see what these people look like. And they looked just like everybody else, except, there was sort of the hippie period, and there were a couple of hippie types in there, but there were some normal-looking people, and they looked at me very suspiciously. I'm well dressed in a suit and a narrow tie, the sideburns that you had to wear in those days, and they knew I was a corporate guy. And so anyway, they showed me around, and I expressed some interest, and I checked out some books, and it turned out for the next, 6 months or so, I probably read all of the major works that they had, and the works of Lenin and Khrushchev and Stalin and all of those, and Marx, of course. You have to start with that. And so I sort of became an aficionado. They invited me to attend some of their recruiting meetings. They thought that maybe they would like to have a young corporate executive type in the Communist Party. They didn't call it a recruiting meeting. They called it an informational meeting. And so I went to a couple of them, and they study groups. They call them that also. And I realized that having read the books, I knew more about Marxism and Leninism than those guys did. They had never read the books, but they'd heard the slogans, from each according to his ability, to those according to their need, and all that stuff, against racism and war and all these things. And I knew the origins of these things. So anyway, I got very much up to speed on Marxism and Leninism. Now, I make a distinction between that because many people think that Marxism and Leninism are, what is that, two different words for the same thing, and it's not so. Marxism is based on the writings of Karl Marx, of course, in Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. And basically, it's the ideological and somewhat economical base for socialism. And Marx made it very clear that communism was something that would come in the future after socialism would be successful. There was no communism in the world, according to Marx, and Lenin, by the way, in those days, because communism was the ultimate goal, and Marxism was socialism was a stepping stone to communism. So even though we called countries like Russia as communist countries, they weren't really. Russia was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as we all know. And they considered the hardcore communists, and the ones that read the books, knew that that was not communism, it was socialism. And the one thing that fascinated me, and this is where I'm going with this topic of power, is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was quite an authority on how to come to power. That was probably, if you had to say, the summary of Lenin's contribution to the Marxist-Leninist literature, it would be coming to power. And the key to that is that Marxists believe in the socialist ideology, and that's about it. They believe in the idea of socialism or communism, or what we'll soon identify as collectivism later on. So the Marxists are the theorists. They're the academics, the teachers, the debaters, and so forth. Now, Lenin came along and added something to it. Lenin is considered to be the founder of the Communist Party. And the Communist Party is a whole different animal from the group of academics who talk about Marxism. The party was an organization dedicated to the creation of Marxist political systems, to overthrow countries, to, in Lenin's words, come to power. And his philosophy, if you take all of those books, and he was a prolific writer, if you take all of his writings, all of his essays, and you had to boil them down to one thing, it would be, this is a manual on how to come to power. That's all of it. And I just give you, you've heard the slogan, you know, he said, promises are like pie crusts made to be broken, and so forth. He's a very quotable guy. And why are promises made to be broken? Well, because it brings you to power. You see, everything was coming to power. That was the theme. Even if you didn't see it written, it was between the lines of everything he wrote. He said, comrades, we're trying to come to power in some country which is very nationalistic, and they don't like communism. So what do? You go in there and say you're a communist and you want to overthrow their country? Of course not. Comrades, what you do is you go in and say you're against communism. You tell them you're for nationalism and for all of the old cultural values of the system. You become one of them, and they look at you as a leader. You get it, comrades? You become their leader. Once you get their leader, then you get into power. You see, everything is to come to power. Once you're in power, now you can reveal yourself, but it doesn't make any difference, because if they object, you kill them. You have the police power of the state. You have the armies. You have the media. You see, this is Leninism. And there was never a country in the world that was ever taken over by Marxism. All of those countries that we like to call communist countries were taken over by Marxist-Leninists. They put a slash usually between those two words. And when you see the phrase Marxist-Leninist, look at the word Leninist, and you know that you're dealing with a group of people who are coming to power. They're not just debating. They're not just talking about whether the poor should have a collective pool to draw from or all of that nonsense. They're talking about what lies, deceit, killing, cheating, stealing, whatever it takes to come to power. Those are the people you're talking about. Now, is this exclusive to the communists? No. Every political system in the world is based on that philosophy, but they don't organize it and explain it quite so brilliantly as Lenin did. You go to all of the tin horn dictatorships down and around the world, and you understand they operate on the same principle, but they never wrote about it. It just sort of comes of, instinctive. Lenin was all about coming to power. Now, having said that, I rejected that, of course. Lenin is a bad guy. He stood for collectivism. Everything he did resulted in the enslavement and the impoverishment of the people, even in spite of the slogans. The Marxists and the Leninists say, well, that might be true, but that is why we are going to change human nature. We're going to change how you think. We're going to practice eugenics and change how you're born and what your incentives are and your instincts are. We're going to change all that. Well, that's not my topic either. As long as we live in the real world, in a world of freedom, in which nobody's meddling with our brains or with our genetic structure, then we can stand firm on what we call the creed of freedom. Our opponents, our collectivist opponents, know very well how important it is to control the educational system and the major media. They understand how important it is to recruit thought leaders. They go to people who are leaders of organizations like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and church organizations, social clubs. They deliberately recruit those people, or they bring their own people who have been trained and put them in and say, now I want you to move up and I want you to become president of your local Kiwanis club, or whatever it is, your labor union. That's a favorite target, of course. And so they go in there with that goal in mind, and I've seen some of their training manuals. This is real, folks. Well, we're out there playing our golf games and enjoying life, and as Edward said, we're having a good time. Our opponents, our collectivist opponents, have been organizing, planning. In other words, they have become, whether they know it or not, Marxist-Leninists. They're coming to power. And we're wondering, what happened to us? This is what happened to us. We were asleep while they were waging war against us. We didn't even know we were in a war. That's why we didn't win it. Yes, we were and we are, and we're going to continue to be in this ideological war between collectivism and individualism, probably for the rest of our lives. It'll never go away. So the question is now, what are you going to do about it? I hope you'll make the same decision I did, and that is I want to fight back. I'm not going to stand around and just say, isn't this terrible? No. I'm going to stand back, no matter what, stand forth and do whatever I can to oppose and defeat collectivism, especially that which is empowered in the state. And we need, in order to accomplish that goal, we need others just like you. We all want to be fighting not only against tyranny, but somewhere down the line, we'll be fighting for something to replace it. And we better be on the same page then. Otherwise, we'll be in the same trap that has captured most of history. People have fought off tyrannies one after the other at great cost in treasure and blood. And what happens when the tyranny is overthrown? They replace it with another one just like it. Or worse. We don't want to do that, which means we must know what we believe.